Today we're looking at an extremely powerful audio console that won't break the bank. Today's video is going to be a little bit longer, and that's by design. Today we're taking a look at the Waves LV1 digital console. I think this console is going to become very popular in the near future. It has huge flexibility, a very large channel count. It's easy to set up and network. It gives you a whole lot of tools at your disposal, and it sounds really amazing. And best of all, it's extremely affordable. I mean, it's probably a third of the cost of some of the big boy consoles with the same amount of features. And not only that, you get the ability to use the Waves plugins, which if you are in the studio world, they're like one of the gold standards. They sound amazing. You've seen me feature my good friend Alan Goodwin on the channel before. He's actually amazing at implementing audio setups, and he was one of the first people I ever saw to put one of these Waves LV1 systems into a church. And so today I decided to take a camera and go to an actual venue that he had installed the Waves LV1 package into and let him talk about the console from start to finish. I put some bookmarks on the video for you to skip through if you needed to, but I really didn't want Alan to hold back. I wanted him to do a really deep dive on the Waves LV1 system to give you a sense of how to set it up and use one. Let's face it, you can't scroll through YouTube for even a few seconds without seeing videos that deal with the Behringer X32, but it's really hard to find a whole lot of good information on the Waves LV1. So I wanted those of you who were searching for information from someone who's been using this console for years so that you could get a good sense of how the system is set up and can be used. Tell us, let's start with the pros and the cons of going with a Waves system. This is still a pretty new system for a lot of people.
Right.
And it's starting to catch on with a lot of churches. Actually, we're seeing more and more of this here on YouTube. But there are a few drawbacks. Let's start with the cons, and then there's a whole lot of pros.
Yeah.
So what are the cons? What are the drawbacks?
So the drawbacks of, I'll start with the general category of virtual consoles. The cons of virtual consoles of any kind, this is the Waves Emotion console, the LV1, but really any of them, the cons are that without a ton of extra hardware or even touchscreens, you obviously don't have real faders you can touch. That's kind of a drawback, but there are ways to fix that sort of with touchscreen, multi-touch monitors like we have here. They can do multiple fader rides at once, and obviously there are peripherals you can buy that add on to that. But I would say that's still a general con, that it doesn't have
the actual tactile situation for a lot of people.
It's not hands-on, you know. And on the flip side of that, another hardware-related issue is that it's kind of several pieces to make up one console. And so the downside to that is that, you know, you could have a bunch of different things go wrong. Now the upside to that is if something does go wrong, sometimes it's really easy to replace just one piece of it rather than, so that's kind of a con pro, but ultimately it's just not as conventional to have these pieces as it is just to have a console that does everything in it. It has I/O, it has processing, it has faders, it has the software, it has everything in it. So I would say that's just a downside to this. If you don't know a lot about console architectures or how to fix things or how to adjust things or anything like that, then it can be very interesting to set this up and maintain it and utilize it if you just want a console that does its job and that's it. So if you don't have a consistent team or a consistent production director, something like that, it may be something you would just want to consider heavily on that aspect to make sure that it's not like this is a venue that everybody uses. Because if this was a performing arts center and we had this, there'd probably be most people would probably come in and say like, well, I don't know, how do I start this thing up? It's not a console, you know, where's the on button? It's a PC, what is this? So it's just something to consider that would be potentially a downfall. But other than the hardware restrictions and kind of the unconventional nature of it, I wouldn't say there are any other real blaring cons to the idea of a virtual console. Now those two can be big things, but I can't see any other category. Now with Waves specifically, the Waves Emotion LV1 virtual console, the cons to this is that this software, while being adapted, and it is Waves, so it's not hidden to the market, it's pretty well known, but it's also not the X32, it's not Allen and Heath, it's not one of the top players right now, not Digico, it's none of those. So because it's kind of sitting under the market a little bit, I feel like they don't put as much research and development and updates into this as they do maybe their plugins or some of their other products. And so we've had this for 3.5 years now. 3.5 years. And it's better now, but at the start especially, it had bugs and bugs and bugs. And that's not something some other virtual consoles have, but this one in particular, it would freeze just like Pro Tools could freeze. And so what do you do then? You know, it would, for example, it would just relabel stuff. I'd walk in here and a label would be different and nobody did it. It's just really weird things. The sound grid processing capacity deal here for the server would just max out even if you didn't add a plugin or change something. It would just max out and start getting real glitchy sounding. And so every time that happened, I would call up Waves tech support and they would remote in, which is really neat. I would say that's the pro of this. And they would research through their, the system files and all that stuff and find the error over their lunch break or whatever. And then fix it and send out a patch. So they were really responsive, but it was ridiculous if we're in a service and the thing freezes and then we got to make a decision here. So
having this 3 years ago, you were one of the absolute earliest adopters of this technology in this building.
Probably so. There were things on here. Apparently now, I haven't even tried it yet because I'm not production director here anymore. I just kind of use it. Apparently there's a way to actually color code these things now. Or maybe they just took it away altogether. When I first installed this, it said you could color code the scribble strips just like any console, and there were even a list of colors there, and they just didn't do anything. So it's things like that. They were like, okay, what is this I've just bought?
Now the pros of this system is the price, which for what you're getting is fairly amazing. I know that every system is going to be a little bit different, but estimate what this system would probably cost with how many channels y'all have. So any virtual console, I would say, unless it's just for some reason way overpriced, is probably going to be way more value engineered than a conventional console setup of similar size and capacity. So this one in particular, at the time, I believe prices are similar. We got the 64 channel software. It was $2,000. We got host computer, we got a server and I/O. And so all in all, we actually bought 2 of these consoles, one for front of house and lobby, that kind of stuff, building sims, then one for monitors and broadcast. And so we got basically 2 duplicate setups that shared I/O across the whole thing. And that total setup with screens, with plugins, even with everything, was around, I want to say like 12 to 15 somewhere, which for 2 consoles, 64 channel consoles with 20 something buses, stereo buses, and plugins, and the servers, and and I/O, that's unheard of. To get Digico for that capacity, to get Yamaha that capacity, anything in that capacity, it's going to be way more than that. It's probably a little more now. The one problem they've had, Waves in particular, is they keep swapping brands for the I/O because COVID, the chips were gone. Yamaha, you couldn't buy Rio Snakes for a while, all that stuff. Dante has gone up, everything's gone up. So the I/O, they're always swapping around, like this brand for 16 channels, this brand for 64 channels. So these that we have, they don't even make anymore. And the ones they make now are much more expensive. But the software, I believe, is the exact same, and the plugins are so cheap now. So and Waves is, for those of us in the studio world, is some of the top-notch plugins, and that would be my number one reason to go with this. In fact, I see you have the SSL plugin.
It's one of the best
right there. So explain to people why it's so amazing to be able to use the plugins live.
Yeah, so when we, the reason we did it here and the reason I would do it anywhere is when COVID started we, like most churches, stopped in-person services, and we did most services pre-recorded. We did music sets in my studio. We did live full band sets in this room, in an empty room. And since they were, during the week, I took them into the studio, the stems, and mixed them. We had multiple cameras. It looked and sounded great. And so when we came out of that hiatus and started meeting in person again, and they wanted broadcasts and they wanted all these things, I said, okay, well, to make that sound like you're used to it sounding from the COVID setup, we're going to need to have plugins live. We're going to need to have a better video switcher. We did several things, but the main thing for audio was more channels, because we had an X32. We were maxing out. I said, we're going to need room mics. We're going to need extra drum mics. We're going to need all these extra things to make it sound full, and we're going to need to have better processing on all those channels. So I started looking at the cheapest way, the most value engineered way to make that happen. And to be friendly for our volunteers and all that stuff. And this was the obvious answer for me, and still is, actually. I don't know of anything else, especially because they're fixing it constantly. I would buy a system like this and use it on the road in a heartbeat.
Tell us the basic setup. Let's start with
elements.
that. So the elements of it, for anybody who has no clue what we're looking at, explain how the system itself is set up, and then we'll actually let you give us a tour of the interface.
So I would say there are 4 main pieces with 2 kind of additional pieces that are part of those that you need. There's other things you can add, but the 4 main pieces are a host computer. This is a PC. I'll talk about what that can be in a minute. A host computer, the software, which is called Emotion LV1, that I have pulled up on this host computer, a processing server, which handles the actual audio processing, different from the host computer. The host computer handles the console software. The processing server handles the plugins and the actual audio processing for real-time, performance. So host computer, software, server, and I/O snakes, actual XLR in and outs, and you can do any configuration of a bunch of these elements. Those are the 4 main elements it takes to build this. Within that, you have to have a network switch. That's kind of a no-brainer, but I'll go ahead and include it as one of those, like, duh, everything has to talk to each other. Right. You have to have Cat6 cables. You have to have a network switch. And then the last thing I would say you need is the actual plugins, because this console is great and it can work by itself. It comes with a basic EQ and compressor, but the whole point of having this really is to have the Waves plugins built into the console. So I would go ahead and say that's a 6th main category. Other things you can have are peripherals like a fader bank. Waves actually makes one. They came out with it after I bought all this, but an actual, I think it's motorized faders with scribble strips that change. And so you can have actual faders, USB, probably $1,000 or what, you can do all that kind of stuff as well. You can have an iPad and walk around the room. You can have phones for monitor control. But those are the main elements.
Okay, tell us about the in-out capabilities of this particular system.
So with the software, you buy a license based on how many channels you need. So we got the biggest one, which is 64 channel software license. I think it was a couple $1,000s. And then I bought 3 snakes, and you can see those here, setup window. These are the 3 snakes. I have one at front of house, I have one by the drums, and one by the piano. Both of those are in racks. And then basically, these are 2 bigger ones. I think they're 24 in by 12 out, and this is a 16 in by 8 out. They were both, gosh, what brand is this? It's Sound Studio STG, and that's what they are. And I don't think those are currently on the market. I haven't checked in a couple weeks though, so maybe they're back. So those were, a couple $1,000s each or whatever they came out to being. And they appear on the network. You can communicate these via Dante if you really want to, but you have to get a bridge, just like some of these other consoles that have a proprietary communication system. This one's proprietary communication system is called WSG, Waves Sound Grid. And so I didn't want to do Dante. I didn't need to. We surprisingly don't use Dante for anything in this building right now. So I have it going Waves Sound Grid, and that's literally just a Cat6 cable to a dedicated network switch. It's not part of your IT network. It does not have internet on it. It's a audio only network that has a little Netgear. Here's one of them. There's a little Netgear switch here. Just cheap $80 whatever. And Everything's connected to it. So all three snakes, both host computers and both servers are connected to this Wave Sound Grid network. It's not point-to-point. AES-50 in the Behringer X32 world is point-to-point. A snake goes to a console, goes to another console. It's A to B. This is like a traditional network where everything's connected, there is no order. As long as it's connected, it's good. And that's how Wave Sound Grid works. One thing to note on your host PC, it can be anything you want. It can be a Dell, it can be a Lenovo, as long as it has 2 network cards, because if you have just one network card, you have to use that for the Wave Sound Grid audio network, which means the computer doesn't have internet on it. Maybe Wi-Fi, maybe. I chose to go with the Waves Axis 1. This is the older generation, they look different now, but this half of it right here is the host computer, this half is the server, the Extreme server. And the Axis 1 is a basic PC, pretty reasonable price. The only difference is it has 2 network cards in it that are ready for this. It comes with all the software installed on it, all the junk taken off of it, and it fits in a half rack. I was like, let's just go with the Waves, get a package deal kind of thing. And so I have one network card that's, you can see them here. There's one, there's the other, and you tell it which one you want your internet to be on, which one you want your audio to be on. And that's how you know if everything's connected. And so basically the setup, I have the 3 snakes, I have the server, and then this is the server, and then that's for if I change to a B set of I/O, which would be useful for virtual sound check. If I had multi-tracked a practice, a rehearsal, and I wanted to play back those stems from the same computer, which is really handy because it comes with a free multi-tracking software, virtual sound card, all that stuff, then I can just swap all the inputs to B, rack B, and it suddenly pulls them without having to change anything except B on all of them from the virtual sound check rather than from the actual live snakes. That's what that's for. And then if you were to, we don't have it set up on front of house right now to avoid confusion, but if you wanted an iPad or iPhone control or anything else, if you would put that under the controls tab here. That's for all your other peripherals.
All right, run us through what a channel strip looks like and how you would set it up.
So we're getting ready for an event here, and I did some mixing yesterday, so let's look at kick in. So let's start with input. So you have, preamp gain, just like any console. You have phantom power. You have polarity switch, if you want to flip that. This is a trim. I actually don't know why that's up so high, but that's kind of like an additional fader. I did not do that. To patch it, by the way, I'll go up to the patch tab here at the top. I'm going to activate all my snakes and go input. And so this is the grid. You see these little green squares. This is how I tell it, okay, kick in channel is coming from drum snake channel 1 and so forth. And you can change any of this. Same for outputs. You can go mix bus outs. So here we have a lobby feed going out of front of house snake 6 and 7, which is down there. So or direct outs if you're wanting to do something with processing. So that's how your patching works. Real easy, real logical, unlike some. Mm-hmm. So you got your preamp. Then I go to my rack, which is where I have plugins. For this kick drum, I have F6. Looks like it's doing some really specific feedback reduction points, real narrow, and then cleaning up some mud in this room, and then a little high end off. I have a pull tech that is actually just kind of in there to warm it up a little bit and to take off some more high end gently. Then the best Waves plugins ever, the 4000 SSL, and it's doing a little light compression, some gating to keep feedback from happening, and very minimal EQ. And then Smack Attack, it's like a transient shaper. So it just shapes the transients without adding low end or compression. It's kind of a different way to shape transients. And then looks like I have another EQ doing some more things for some reason. I don't think I actually added that. That must have been someone else. Then you have effects sends. So just like any console, you can set up reverbs and delays and all that. That's where this would happen. You have also monitor sends, which we're not really using on this console. This was from These are set up from an oops day that they told me about when the monitor console died because of, guess what, a glitch. And so they frantically set up all the monitor mixes on this console, and guess what, they didn't have to move a thing. That's actually a really cool thing about this. Even though it started as a disaster, they were easily able to just say, okay, it's now from this console using those same inputs. Nobody had to move on stage. You didn't have to move a snake physically. You didn't have to move a cable. You just simply went to the patch window and said, now that drum ears device is coming from this console instead of that one. Done. And then they had to redo their mix, obviously, but it was that easy to patch it, and they did that in half an hour that Sunday morning. So
show us a vocal strip and some of your favorite plugins that you love to use live.
So this is my wife's vocal. We're starting with F6, which F6 is an EQ, but it also has compressors on each EQ band. So it's a pretty light EQ happening here, but then each of these has compression happening. That way, the more a singer digs into a note, it actually compresses, because if I just take out mid-range, for example, and they're singing real quietly, it can sound real manipulated and kind of wonky. But if I have it to where it takes out as they get louder, then that harshness is only taken away when they're louder. So it's a little more musical of an approach. But then a straight up 1176 just to control dynamics, which for a vocal is hard to beat. It's the CLA thing. Sibilance, which is my current favorite de-esser from Waves. They have some older ones. I think this one's just really easy and smooth. And then what I do before any of this stuff, this plugin should actually probably be at the top. I don't know why it's in that order. I did this in a hurry yesterday, is I ring out the mics. So I turn off all these plugins, use X feedback, and just crank the thing and let it pull some feedback points. And then the great thing about X feedback is you can come in here after that and change some of them. So this one was way down, which was a feedback point, but it affected the musicality of the mic. So I brought it back up, thinned it out. But it's a quick way it's really just an EQ, but it's just a smart one. So I just use that for EQ points and then do my musicality shaping after that. That's really all I do to a given vocal. I don't like to gate vocals. I don't like to gate hardly anything, live or in the studio, actually. And there's effects afterwards, but even though we have all these plugins, that's kind of the antithesis of this situation, is that you have to be careful not to overdo it.
Do you do any processing on the master bus?
Definitely. Master, we have my system tuning. It's a little gross, but that's what the room needed. That's further system tuning using some multi-band for only when it gets loud. The heart of the mix, which is an SSL bus compressor, is taken away 2 to 3 dB, just glues it like a studio mix. Sometimes I'll add a pull tech, or it looks like it's disabled, but this is a tape emulation plugin, something to warm it up a little bit. I don't think it's really needed for a room. I would do that on the broadcast mix, definitely. I'll show you that chain in a minute. And then a limiter that's not really doing gain reduction like you would in a studio mix, really just a safety limiter. And then the subwoofers are on a separate bus here using the mono channel. On this console, there's LR, center, and mono. And you can enable different channels on different things. And so all I have on the subwoofers is a limiter that's doing a little more just to catch some of the transients from blowing up the subs.
All right, we want to walk up and see the snakes in the back now. What do you want to do?
Let's do it. All right, so we got a stage rack here that has wireless antenna distribution, backup antennas, both wireless ears and mics, tracks interface, and I think the only other thing in here besides a patch bay is the snake. And so that's one of those bigger snakes you see is getting a whole bunch of things, from tracks to wireless mics to in-ear mixes on the outputs, keys, guitar, all those kind of things. And again, just a single Cat6 cable.
And where's the other snake located at?
The other one is just in that rack across the way there by the drums. That way there are no long cables going across the stage, at least for audio. There are some for lighting. But that way everything on that side of the stage is in that snake, everything on this side is in this snake. Easy.
And the beauty of this system is that you can split and have this other console really inexpensively, and you have all the plugins, which are amazing for broadcast.
That's right. I will say we did buy 2 licenses for all the plugins. Just there may be a way to get around that. There may actually not be, but I just wanted to be ethical and do it the right way. It wasn't that expensive. I knew exactly what plugins I wanted, so it was probably just a few $100s of plugins when it came down to it. So yeah, we have another another set of the Axis 1 computer, host computer, and the server Extreme. And then there's a network switch around here somewhere, getting all that. And then another set of these duplicate monitors, touchscreen monitors. And you'll notice everything looks the exact same in terms of the channel layout, except I just have plugins that sound way different, because with broadcast mixing, you're mixing for multiple volume levels, multiple destinations. It could be phones, speakers, it could be a car speaker, a TV, or a nice system that someone's listening on at low volume, at high volume. Whereas at front of house, you're mixing for one destination, one volume level. So it's a completely different approach. If you combine the approach, then you end up making each one of them worse, in my opinion. So that's why I separated it out. And for example, on our master EQ or master rack, I'm doing a lot of different things than I was front of house. This is a virtual summing, the NLS, which there's a channel instance of it on most of the channels, and then the bus instance of it on the main bus, which emulates the summing characteristics of, looks like a Neve console here. And so it just adds a little bit of warmth. It's kind of the inconsistencies of what those consoles would do. Not in EQ, not in compression, it's just harmonics of the summing. And we got an SSL compressor, we got Pultec, doing some high-end things, low-end things, just warming it in general. Tape, warming it. Looks like I'm even putting Smack Attack on the, I don't know if I did that actually. Well, maybe so though. Maybe it brings a little bit of the transients up before I squash them in limiting. I don't know. Then an API, yeah, I don't think I did this. That's way too many compressors. It looks like we have an API Vitamin, which is another warmer harmonic deal, and then finally an L2 limiter that's doing a lot more limiting to get the broadcast mix up way louder and way more controlled of a level. So that's maxing out your 8 insert slots for this. That is one drawback, is that you can only have 8 inserts, which most people would probably say, well, that's plenty. Yes, in the studio, I could understand needing more, but for live, that's if you can't do it with 8, you know, I would probably struggle to understand what you need more for.
Is there anything specific to the broadcast that you do differently for any of the specific channels? What about, let's talk about pitch correction.
We don't do any pitch correction. You can, but the one main reason I didn't do it here is because this console is also the monitor console. So when you're a singer and you hear the pitch correction in your mix, that can really throw you off. And so to do that, I would probably have to have a third console and put it only on the broadcast and or front of house mix. For me, when talking to the worship pastor here, our personal opinions was that we just didn't really want to move that direction. It creates more problems sometimes, fixes some, creates others, like a drum shield. So we just didn't ever move that way, and it had never really been a huge problem. We got some good singers. One thing I will say that's different on this mix is just how I do group processing. So this console has input channels, it has master buses, it has DCAs, which are, audio does not flow through DCAs or VCAs. They are just group faders, pretty much, just to quickly mute or control the level of something. No processing, no rack, nothing. But if you do want audio to flow through a single fader for group processing other than the master, and of course other than the input channel, we have what's called group faders here. So different than DCAs are group faders. So for example, I have all the drum channels going into the drum group, which has further processing on it. So like in the studio, I wouldn't do this at front of house, but in the studio, I will group process and group compress the drums to get them all working together well, rather than just being individually compressed. Another great example of how to use this is side chaining. And this is something really heavy on this mix. So for the guitar keys bus and the tracks bus, I have a compressor that's getting a sidechain input from the sing bus. That way, every time someone sings, it reduces, not much, but reduces the volume of the tracks and of the guitar and keys. That way you can have those tracks and those guitars hot in the mix, but it doesn't compete with the vocal level that they kind of balance. And I'll do that some on the front of house mix, but front of house is loud enough and there's feedback and all that stuff you have to worry about that I probably wouldn't do much of it front of house. But on a broadcast mix, you got to squeeze everything in there. So it's really important to have group processing on that. For room mics, I have them going to a bus. I have 6 room mics in this room, and they go to a stereo widener. That's something I would never, well, I wouldn't use room mics in a front of house mix anyway, but I would probably never use stereo widening in a front of house mix because that gets all phasey and crazy. But in a broadcast mix, if I want something to sit a little more on the sides to let the vocal and the snare drum and those things up the middle, such as room mics or tracks or overheads, then having S1 or another kind of widener is huge for a broadcast mix. One more thing I'll do. So we got group processing, we got effects processing, kind of like groups, but it's a send return. I'll have a vocal, vocal verb, vocal delay, vocal infinite reverb. I'll also have a vocal doubler, and I'm using the Real ADT2V, which is a automatic double tracking emulator, which we can't double track vocals live, obviously, but if I want that sound, it's not reverb, it's not delay, it's doubling, then I can emulate it with that plugin, and then I have a really short ambient reverb on it, and then I'll mix in that a little bit just to widen the lead vocal without having to drench it in reverb. That's something I probably wouldn't do at front of house either. I even have a doubler for the instruments. If the acoustic guitar needs a little bit of widening, then we can put that on there. So these are examples of things you can do on this console that really just open up your mind, don't cost a lot. They work most of the time and are volunteer friendly because our volunteers don't know the first thing about the plugins. They just get a set of faders just like any other console and are told to balance it out. And we have presets for that vocalist, preset for that snare drum, preset for all that stuff. One more thing, I know I'm talking a lot, one more thing to mention is the custom layers. Most consoles have this now, but it's great to see it on this one. Instead of just seeing your inputs, your groups, your DCAs, your master, you can have a custom layer. You start here with a blank slate. On these custom layers, you can add anything from an individual input to a group, to a main, to a DCA, to special things like talkback or matrices. That way I have like a fader bank that's just for transitions. So it's got all band in one fader. It's got all drums in one fader. It's got all the vocals split out, including the talking mics rather than the singing mics. It's got computer graphics feeds. It's got room mics, so things that you would want to reach for quickly for transitions in the service.
So for your volunteers at your church, you could probably set up a very simple one-page thing with all they needed to mess with.
That's what I've done is I have 3 pages. So I have the transitions one, which is probably where you'd start most of the time. Then I have a music one, which breaks out the instruments. So I have, but they're still grouped. I still don't give them kick, snare, all that. It's still just drums, bass, guitar, keys, and then the vocals and then the effects. So during a song, they're sitting here, hopefully instruments are good to go, they're mixing vocal levels and mixing effects, that's it. Transition comes, they boom, grab the pastor's mic, grab the bumper video, grab the whatever else. Then occasionally, if they need the extended music tab, it breaks out kick, snare, tom, extra things like strings and room mics and
for specialty mornings.
Yeah, choir, vocal doubler. If you want to go in and mess with some of the details without still looking at the overwhelming, nature of 64 channels, you just stay on your custom layers. And I think I even have a guy here. Yeah, that stands for Bryce. He's come in and made his own layer. That way it doesn't mess with anybody else's. So it's really, really great. You can store scenes. You can export those scenes. Tonight I'm going to be multi-tracking on this console with Tracks Live, and so I'll have all the dry stems that I can take and mix later in the studio. Really
if great. A church wanted to, or somebody wanted to start with just a single 16-channel console and snake, we're probably talking a $5,000 or $6,000 budget could handle that.
I would say so, yeah. If you have the software for 16 channels is cheaper. I don't know what it is off the top of my head. Say $1,000. That you can get a smaller server. So say computer server software is $3,000, and then you get an IO for another $2,000. Yeah, that's $5,000, $6,000.
$6,000, okay. And then to wrap it up, tell people about the actual Waves package. You purchase the plugins,
right?
but then you have a subscription each year to make sure that you get all of the updates.
Yes, so you can do Waves plugins two ways now. When I bought all these, they did not have their subscription model yet where you get everything for however many dollars a month or year. They only had perpetual licenses, but those licenses are relatively cheap. If they update versions and maybe a new version of Windows comes out and you have to upgrade it, sometimes you got to make sure you're planning in your budget.
I think I have to pay maybe, is it $150 a year or $100 a year to keep my Waves account up to date, and that allows me to, when you have a new operating system come out and your plugins don't function with it anymore, they give you all the patches.
Which is, I don't even know the long end anymore. I'm not production director here anymore, but the point is, it may be worth it at this point to do just the subscription model if it comes out with new plugins, comes out with new updates for them, because that is the one thing. If they come out with a brand new update for this software that fixes all the bugs, that would be great, but it's only on Windows 11 and this is when, I don't know, then we may have to pay a couple $100s to get all these plugins up to the new version, even though we own the perpetual license. So the subscription model may be something you can build into your operating budget and not as your capital expense of upgrading this console. But
if you're interested in talking to Alan more about the Waves setup, or you actually want to consult with him for your own project, I've dropped his website down below in the description. He actually does offer his services for that. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. It helps me out. Hit the like button. We'll see you on the next video.